then at that point, we went to Silicon Valley. We had a good story, we had a good pitch. Jason Calacanis wrote us a check. And then at that point, like everything changed. We went from having, no money to just like having Jason Calacanis, one of the greatest angel investors of all time, write us a check. And I think at that moment, it was like, okay, we can figure this out.
Hey, this is Paul from Freight Caviar, and you're listening to the Daily Freight Caviar podcast, where I interview people from the logistics industry on freight tech, outsourcing, and other interesting topics. If you want to check out more Freight Caviar content, go to freightcaviar.com. Welcome, everyone, to another Freight Caviar podcast. Today, we are talking to Taylor Monks, the CEO and founder of BasicBlock.io. BasicBlock.io is on a mission to pay truck drivers faster. They also just raised $78 million in debt and equity back in the middle of last year, but it got announced in the beginning of this year. Taylor, thank you so much for taking your time to be on the show today.
Yeah, thanks for having me on. We obviously crossed paths with a bunch of friends and people that we know. So excited to finally get on and kind of share our story and answer any questions you may have.
Definitely. Taylor, could you tell us how old you are?
Yeah, so I'm 27. I'm 27, college dropout. This is my first business. I've pretty much been fired from every single job I've ever had besides this one. And I always joke with a lot of our employees that I'll eventually be fired from this one as well. But yeah, that's how old I am and kind of like my experience.
Okay, so you dropped out of college. Which college was that, and why did you drop out?
Yeah, so I went to college. So I graduated this really small town, about like 16 kids in the center of nowhere, Nebraska, basically, called Litchfield. My stepdad was the superintendent athletic director there. And at the time, I almost wanted to go to a big school like Cornell University, but I ended up backing out, not really for any reason other than to play college football at a small school in Lincoln, Nebraska called Nebraska Westland. So, I got a call from one of our coaches and said, hey, you should come play football here. And kind of changed my mind and decided, hey, I'm going to go to college in Lincoln, Nebraska. It was a pretty small college. I don't know the exact numbers, but I want to say there's maybe like 3,000 kids there. But it was in an awesome college town, like in the capital of Nebraska. So with like the Huskers and UNL and good football and good bars and, majority college town. So it's pretty fun to be there.
Sure. Well, what made you drop out?
So when really what happened was there was a lot of different things that had happened to lead up to it. I was a pretty good student. Like I, got good grades, I didn't study a lot, but, then after I'd gotten introduced, really one of my professors introduced me. I had a lot of ideas and he introduced me to kind of like one of the pitch contests that Nebraska Westland put on. And my freshman year, I won that. My sophomore year, I won that. And then my junior year, I won that. So I won it back to back to back, where I was placing in kind of like the winner's circle, I guess, classic like participation trophy type thing. But then after I'd kind of done that and then gotten some experience in startups, and then I got to travel abroad to Estonia and work at Skype, Pipedrive, and TransferWise, I learned really quickly, like in technology and a lot of these new tech companies and startups, nothing that I was learning in school like applied. It felt like almost nobody really knew what was going on in startups, which is kind of true as like I've founded my own now. But it's also like figure it out, like is very the mentality. And I thought that I wasn't really learning that in school. And then pair that with like, I started to get into blockchain and Bitcoin. And one of the biggest things that really, kind of like steamrolled the idea of me dropping out of college is I had made about $50,000-$60,000 in Bitcoin in 2017 as the price like rose up. At the same time that was going on, I was a junior in my international finance class. So like international finance, Bitcoin, like, I had real tangible money. I decided to write a midterm paper on like what cryptocurrency could mean on the implication of like foreign trade and like and money. And it was, it was supposed to be, a factual paper, right? And backed with all these things. And I felt that it was very factual. And I felt that it was a real thing and could be a real thing. What I know now is it's a lot, whether it's a factual thing or just more complicated than, anything else is a whole completely different story. But I wrote a paper and my professor failed me on that paper and said, it's not realistic and not, this is opinion based, not factual based. And I would agree to disagree, I guess, is probably the easiest way I would say that. And then that was really the final straw. So I took that paper. I ended up having that paper for years. I had it in my backpack I used to carry around. But at that moment after that class, I mean, literally during the class, I picked up my bag and walked out, and then I didn't really know how to drop out. I just didn't go back. So I just kind of was like, this was it. I'm leaving. Like, and I remember her being like, where are you going? And I'm just like, not here. Like, I'm not in this class anymore. And, some of my friends were like in that class and they were like, what are you doing? And I'm like, yeah, I'm done with college. This is stupid. So I ended up leaving college. And then moving to London where my dad was. And that was really like the start of like, what do I want to do next? And how do I want to do it? And, lo and behold, BasicBlock kind of came out of that.
Okay. So you moved to London. What year was that?
This was end of 2017 going into 2018.
Okay. You moved to London and you're there with your dad. It's like, well, what do you do in London?
Yeah, honestly, drank a lot of beers. Like, drank a lot of beers, watched the darts. Yeah, just kind of hung out with my dad and, was like interested in cryptocurrency. Okay. I was doing a lot of research at that point in time. What do I want to build? How do I want to build it? Was doing like obsessed about kind of like finance and money movement. And really didn't have a ton of ideas until I came back to Omaha, Nebraska. So my mom had moved north of Lincoln, about an hour or 45 minutes, I guess, what is it? Northwest of Omaha. And my mom picked me up and she was pretty upset. I was a good student. I went to a good college, and, your parents, when they kind of see this kid dropping out, throwing away his life, my mom was very clear to point that out. I turned down some job offers. I had a really smart girlfriend who was like a doctor. And then I like dropped out like in basically my senior year. She pretty much was like, what are you going to do next? And a lot of people I joke with and say, Nebraska really only has three things, and that's corn, college football, and trucks. And now that our college football team sucks, it's really just like corn and trucks. And I looked out the window and, there was a bunch of trucking companies and like docks and warehouses there. And at the time, it really was just a thought to get my mom to like get off my back. But that thought turned into like an obsession that I've had, for 3 years since then, which has been pretty fun.
Okay. So what year did you move back to the States?
Yeah. So 2018 in about January, like February, I moved back, into my mom's basement. And then that shortly after that, with my business partner and co-founder, Brett, we incorporated BasicBlock. And there was really no thesis around it besides I wanted to work in supply chain and logistics, and I thought blockchain would be a good idea in that. I extrapolated that out and wrote a white paper and then thought, there's a potential that we could do a lot of interesting things of money movement. I had no idea at the time about factoring or really anything about truck drivers in general. I started, the idea to start was, just let me go stand at some truck stops and interview truck drivers. Yeah. And very quickly, like it seemed like blockchain, all this stuff was just like, okay, who cares? Like there's a problem here. And it seemed to be cash flow, and like payment. And then, I took it another step farther where I decided, hey, I'm going to get in a truck and I'm going to hitchhike with these truck drivers. So I did, I hitchhiked with truck drivers thousands of miles across the country. And at that point, it was very clear to me, like these guys need to get paid faster. How do we just solve that problem with blockchain or without it? At that point, I didn't care.
Okay. This whole hitchhiking story, we need to learn as much as possible about this whole hitchhiking. So you literally went to a truck stop. Like tell us everything that we need to know about the hitchhiking story.
Yeah. So, I mean, there's probably a lot more that you don't need to know, but yes. So, I mean, it's pretty fucking wild, right? Like, I think I would call myself like a self-taught industry expert, but like more on the driver side. So like I'm much better at drivers than anything else. So I've learned technology and all these other things, but like what I think we do really well at BasicBlock is really be empathetic towards our drivers. And I think that because we've spent a lot of time like with them. So, the best way I learn is by doing or experiencing firsthand and being able to like think and act like a driver. So yeah, one day, I went to a truck stop and I was asking truck drivers questions. And then, I went home one night and, sleep in my mom's basement. And I just thought, what if I get in one of these? What will happen? And what's the worst that could happen? I might be able to learn how to be a truck driver. And at the very minimum, I'm going to get a couple hours that I'm going to get with a potential user that I can learn so much from. So yeah, the next day, I legitimately would ask truck drivers and talk to truck drivers. And then I'd be like, hey, do you care if I like ride with you? And they're like, well, I'm not staying here. I'm like, well, where are you going? Well, going to Chicago, or I'm going to, Kansas City, or I'm going to Texas or whatever. And I would just be like, can I ride with you? And they're like, well, what's your plan? I'm like, I'll ride with you, and like, I'll buy you a couple dinners and lunches. And, I just want to see what it's like to be a truck driver. And a lot of these, you get a decent amount of no's, but then started to get yeses and like perfect the pitch and kind of figure it out. And then next thing you know, like I'm in a truck and I'm going to Texas, and then I get to Texas and I'm like, well, fuck, I better get in a truck and go back or go somewhere. And it would be pretty nuts, like there was sometimes that it'd be like tough to get different places. But if you were at the right truck stop and you find the right trucker, you could get pretty much anywhere pretty quickly.
That's fascinating. I mean, I love that you did that. Did you record any of it or write about it?
Yeah, so I used to journal all the time and write a ton about it. And there was even kind of a moment in our company history that we kind of joke about now, that I wanted to like record it all. Like I wanted to get, it's funny, like seeing a lot of these documentaries come out where like, these really, I guess famous people have now like decided to record their lives from when they weren't. Like that was us, call that arrogant or, whatever. But we were like, I think we can figure this out, and we thought about recording it, but then ended up just never doing it. We just didn't have the time to do it.
Sure.
But yeah, I used to journal all the time and like document my thoughts, and really like it was super, super clear. Like we need to go solve a payment problem. Very shortly after that, I would say like we got pretty fatigued because, you're just making no money. And, I was doing Solarion studies to like fund everything. So I was like getting injected with like, drugs that hadn't even been FDA approved.
Wait, what?
And then so we, after that part, after we had, kind of figured out what we wanted to build, I thought, oh, we're going to go raise money and be billionaires and create this big company. But the reality of it was just not that. We were in Nebraska, and there really isn't a ton of funding in Nebraska. So we were out of money, specifically me, and my mom was not giving me any more money. So I decided to start doing Solarion studies. So it's like where they like test a drug. So like, before it gets FDA approved, It has to go through human trials. Like that was me. I was getting injected with drugs, like, and they were paying us thousands of dollars, like $5,000-$6,000 for like a week of like, clinical trials, basically.
Any bad side effects?
Well, it's funny. So Charlie Dahoney, one of like our board members, and he was really like the savior in all this when he moved to Omaha and I met him. Yeah, like I used to like, I could like hardly fucking walk, like, and I still have like scars on my arm for like getting injected or like my blood drawn like 50 times a day. Yeah, it was terrible. But, at the time it was just like, it's what we had to do. Nobody would give us money. It's like, and $5,000 for me, like $5,000 for me now lasts a pretty dang long time, but $5,000 for me back then, like I could live on like $500 or $1,000 a month, So like, for me, like it was enough money for us to keep going for, another quarter. And that was a big deal.
Okay. So when BasicBlock started, you were self-funded. Okay. And
yeah, I mean, I wouldn't even say we were self-funded. We were funded by Solarion. Like we had like no money. Like, I mean, I had like negative money. Like I was like, like maxing out credit cards, and then paying them off with Solarion and like, like we like had pretty much negative money is probably the easiest way to say that.
Okay. What kind of services was BasicBlock offering from the get-go?
At that time, like nothing, like it's funny because we had almost nothing, like we didn't have a product. We didn't have anybody to build it. We just had me parading around like with a slide deck. And then at that point, like things changed for us, right? Like, I was starting to do these Solarion studies. I didn't really have any capital. I felt like shit, like, and I met Charlie Dahoney, which I'm sure many of your listeners know who he is, or if they don't, they should know. And he kind of said to me, he met me in a coffee shop. He had, God willing, he had moved from San Diego to Omaha, Nebraska to like buy a truck brokerage. It was pretty incredible when he had a lot of experience in supply chain and, sat me down. And I think he kind of just was like, this kid knows a shitload about factoring and like payments and trucking. Like, I just need to help this kid figure it out. and he kind of coached me up, showed me how to sell some software. And, I saw him. And then like 60 days later, we had sold like $50,000 of like a wireframe. So we didn't have anybody to build it.
Okay.
We didn't have anything. And these carriers started buying our software came back.
What was the software?
At the time, it was, so I saw a very natural tie to documents. So, hey, we need to get clear documents in order to be able to fund these documents. So let's just go sell a document scanner. And that's what we did. So we were selling a document scanner to like fleets of like 50 to 250. At about like 45, 50 days, we sold like 45 grand in that. I think it was, maybe it was a little more. I can't remember. And then met Charlie again. And he was like, holy shit. Like, you just sold nothing. Like, I didn't think you would even do that. Like 99% of founders that I talk to don't ever listen to what I said. You just listen to what I said. And I was back with like 45 grand. And he's like, I was like, what do I do next? And he's like, well, you got to go build it. And I was like, all right, like, how do I build it? I don't know. And he would just be like, well, do this. And then I would go do that. And then I'd come back to him. And then the product just like very evolved over time. And then kind of, we had built out this document scanner, and, a lot of our investors, then at that point, we went to Silicon Valley, we had a good story, we had a good pitch. Jason Calacanis wrote us a check. And then at that point, like, everything changed. Like, we went from having, no money to just like having Jason Calacanis, one of the greatest angel investors of all time, write us a check. And I think at that moment it was like, okay, we can figure this out. Now, I wouldn't say it's been straight line, like up and to the right since that point. But we definitely had always had the backing and like investors that were willing to help us from that point on.
So when did you get that first investment in Silicon Valley?
Goodness, I can't remember. I want to say maybe 2019.
Okay.
May-ish, 2019, maybe.
Okay. So you came back from London like beginning of 2018, and about a year and a half later.
Yeah, about a year and a half later, living in my mom's basement. The entire time we raised money. Yeah. So I survived pretty much a year and a half.
Are you able to tell us? Oh, sorry. Yeah. You survived for a year and a half with basically nothing.
Yeah.
Yeah. The struggle. You're injected with all these drugs that were not FDA approved. You're barely walking. And then Charlie came by and he basically helped you, gave you a lending hand and helped you out.
He just like coached me. Like, I didn't, I think like I played football my entire life. My stepdad's been my coach. I'm somebody tells me what to do, like, I can go do it, and then I can figure out how to do it faster, better. Right. Like, I'm just like, I'd never started a business before. I'd been fired from every single job I ever had. So it was like, I was just like, just tell me what to do and I'll just figure this out. Yeah. And after that moment, and after us raising a little bit of cash, then we got more help, and people started to, we got engineers and people started to build. And then that was really where I got to like come into what I wanted to do and how I wanted to do it, which was just like dream up this idea that I thought eventually we could get to, which, now we're so close to getting there. It's pretty crazy.
Sure. So are you able to tell us how much you raised in 2019?
Yeah. So in 2019, it was somewhere around like $750,000.
Okay. So you get the $750,000 and you go back to Nebraska, right?
Yeah. And it was pretty funny. We got the $750,000. Jason was $100,000 of that. And then we raised a little more on top of that. And, we got in a lawsuit like immediately. Burned his $100,000 like literally overnight. And I remember where I was, where like this dev shop essentially was suing us because they wanted all this equity and, all this bullshit. I don't know how much I'm supposed to say. So they like asked us for all this money, and we're like, fuck you guys, you didn't build shit, because they didn't build shit. And then, our lawyers like, you just have to settle, like, because you can't raise money at this other $650K if you have a lawsuit going on. So we were like, screw it, we got to settle. And I remember calling Jason and being like, having to tell, the greatest angel investor of all time, who not only, by the way, he's that, but he just traditionally doesn't invest in products that like aren't out on the market and have real revenue. Like, he calls it his Goldilocks zone, where, he just wants, 5, 6, 7, 8 paying customers, a product in market. We had like no product in market, and like a couple, like maybe one paying customer that had paid us like pre-sales, right? Technically, I think we had like 7 or 8, but it was like all pre-sales. So we hadn't even delivered on the product. And not only that, we're not from Silicon Valley, we're from Nebraska. So he writes us this 100K check. We're completely outside of his thesis. And then like literally 2 weeks later, I have to call him and be like, hey, you know that $100,000 you wrote me? That, yeah, I just burned that on fire. Like these guys are suing us. So it was pretty funny. And, you know, honestly, like credit to him where credit is due. Like on the phone, he pretty much was like, yeah, sounds good. What's the plan? Like, you know, he'd seen it all. He didn't really care. He's like, yeah, we invested in you. So what do we? Yeah, you know, I'm at that point. I'm sure he's seen it all, right? So like, he was just kind of like, yeah, what's the plan? What are we doing? And I was like, damn, all right. Like this dude, like legitimately believes that I can solve this problem. And that was really empowering. Like at that point, you know, being probably, you know, 24, 25. I'm not sure how old I was at that point. And being like, wow, like one of the best angel investors of all time. Like I just lit his money on fire and like, he doesn't give a shit. He's like, how are we solving this problem? And I was just like, wow, this is awesome. And it's been like that for me ever since. Like my experience with our investors has just been incredible.
I mean, that's amazing that you, at such a young age, you've been able to build a company and get investing, and you're learning and experiencing so much. You're like in the 0.001% for your age.
Yeah, it's really tough though too, right? So like I'm a very person, somebody says the stove is hot and I'm like, well, is it? Like, are you lying to me? And I think that like we're trying to help me grow up and like get past that, you know, and trying to surround me with like really smart people that like I don't have to necessarily touch anything, or I don't have to touch the stove. I can just believe somebody, or somebody just, you know, the strategy at BasicBlock is just don't tell Taylor that the stove is hot, probably, like, because no matter who tells me it is, I probably will touch. But yeah, like it's been really fun, right? Like as a 27-year-old, I've seen a lot of shit now, like a lot. Like I've gotten sued, I've fired co-founders, you know, I've forced resigns, you know, I've seen it all, right? Like some of the stuff I have seen, like at our company, you'd be like, there's just no fucking way that's possible. But we have, and I think that really, while it sucked in the moment to go through a lot of those things, I think it made me a really solid, like weathered founder. And at 27 to still have like the excitement and passion and drive and really no responsibilities besides my dog, like pair that with all the experience I've gotten is I think a very unique combination that helps us move the way that we do and the speed that we do.
Definitely. So Taylor, you got $750,000 in 2019, $100,000 went for the lawsuit. You're left with $650K. Like, what do you do?
Yeah. So it was like, let's build the product, right? Like, let's build this product. We brought in, you know, an experienced engineer to build, and we were off and building. And that was great. That was, you know, awesome. We hired a salesperson.
What was the goal behind building a product? Like, so
we were going to build a document scanner. Like we were going to build this document scanner and deliver on our promise to these customers, you know, that had purchased it a year beforehand. Of we're going to build your document scanner and integrate into your transportation management systems. We brought on a few salespeople. And honestly, at that point in time, it was pretty interesting at that point in time of our company. We brought on, you know, Cole and Paul, and, you know, Brett was at that point there. And Cole kind of became like my right-hand man in the business. And Paul kind of became this really talented engineer from Google, you know, and we brought on like these pretty heavy hitters that were in Nebraska, all young dudes, single type of dudes. And I remember when we raised, at that point, we had brought those people on, but we had also then like very quickly raised, you know, another $1.5 million. So we raised $1.5 million from like Emergent, and then, you know, Rise the Rest came in, and Invest Nebraska and some other people came in. And I felt really strongly at that point in time, once we got that capital and tried to scale up our document scanning solution, the plan was, okay, we're going to build this document scanning solution. We're going to integrate into their transportation management systems. The brokerages will use the same software, and then we'll monetize in factoring on these 1099 drivers in the brokerage. So almost really like a TriumphPay. Like, you know, we're going to build kind of like this. TriumphPay was nowhere near as big as they were now, but we were like, we're going to kind of build a TriumphPay-esque solution. Very quickly though, like it just didn't work, you know, like it wasn't flying off the shelf. And I remember, as you know, we wanted to scale up the sales team and our investors were putting a lot of pressure on us to move. I just told them it's not going to work. You know, we need to move and pivot directly into factoring. Like, let's stop trying to sell to these larger fleets, and let's just go find these motherfuckers that need cash flow. Like, that's what they need. And I went to a board meeting and I said, this is what we need to do. And everybody kind of looked at me like, this isn't going to work. And I wouldn't say it was as dramatic as like, I'll put my job on the line. I know this is going to work, but it was very like, I left that board meeting being like, if this doesn't work, I could be in some serious trouble. Yeah, we started factoring, and to say that it worked like was an understatement. It was like, I had never ever. I think I had a tweet out there a while ago of the week that I think we found product market fit, and I tweeted. I was like, I think we just found product market fit. Like, here's why, and here are like the 3 reasons, right? And it was unbelievable. I'd never seen anything sell as fast as we were selling. Like, we just couldn't keep up with the demand that we had for factoring.
And when was this?
This was then probably 2019, or this was 2020. So this moved this into 2020. Really, Q1 2020 is when we started factoring.
So right before the pandemic.
Yeah. So Q1 2020 we started factoring, and then man, it just blew up. Like, I mean, we've grown. I think I was looking at my numbers, yesterday, and it was like somebody said we had 937% or something like that since 2020.
So, I mean, a lot of companies do factoring. So what difference is there between BasicBlock and a different factoring company?
Yeah. So I think there's like a few core things, right? So number one, I think, we have no minimums and no contracts. Like, we don't believe in that. At the same time, we also don't put liens on their entire business. We file a very specific UCC filing that only goes on their accounts receivable, which doesn't hurt their credit, right? So those are 2 fundamental things that I think a lot of drivers, don't realize is, look, we're not going to lock you into contract, stay as long, as little as you like. And then we're filing UCCs, but only on your accounts receivable, not your entire business, like a lot of these factoring companies are. On top of that, I think we're pretty fast. So in most cases, right, we're a tech company at heart. So we've designed and obsess about the design and user experience of our own app. Like, that is what we do. That is our expertise. That's really, we've learned factoring, but we know tech. So our app is really easy to use, and we have 24/7, 365 customer service, where if you call BasicBlock, you're going to get a real human. You'll never get a call tree. And I think that you pair a lot of those things together. And I think that in an industry that is pretty lackluster customer service, and then ropes in all these hidden fees, which we don't have any either, it sets us up for a pretty interesting way to market the product that has been really successful today, where we get a lot of customers that switch factoring companies, after 6 months of them being, at XYZ factoring company, and come to us, and like the experience is just night and day, right? I think we have something like 30 or 40 reviews, which isn't a lot on Google.
They're really good.
We don't even have, we don't have a single 4-star review. We only have 5 stars, which I guarantee there's no other factoring company that can say that.
Definitely.
So I think for those combination of reasons, we've seen a lot of success. And then I think, where this, like, everybody's heard me say it by now, but the whole, we're going to go to zero, is driven by the aspect of, like, I've seen where we can make money at now, and I see where we can put money back into a lot of these small trucking small trucking companies' hands, that it seems like, a lot of these factoring companies have been having a party and they've been printing cash. And I think that it's time somebody did something about it. And I think that, we sit there and think about that, and we're excited about to build what we think is the future of trucking finance. And part of that is going to zero in factoring.
So could you tell us, Taylor, how you would make money if you offer 0% factoring?
Yeah, that's a good question. So everybody asks that question. It's a great question. It really revolves around a few things. So number one, our data. So we have an extensive data model that helps us underwrite and analyze a lot of these truckers' credit scores to help extend them credit. And then there's other things, right? So, like, we're building them a business bank account, which, everybody knows this, your money that you have in your bank account doesn't sit there, right? They lend it and move it, and they give you interest and rewards for that, like, to do that, to keep your money. And then every single time you swipe your card at the bank, the bank makes money, about like 1 to 2% transaction volume.
Just real quick, BasicBlock would create a bank account for the drivers.
No, we've done that. Yeah. So we've done that already. So when you come to BasicBlock, just like if you're at Venmo, right, or Cash App, what you don't realize is that Venmo or Cash App, you have a bank account. So, when you store your money in Venmo and you have $100 in balance, that is your balance in a legitimate Venmo bank account. That is you, right? The same with us. So when trucking companies are starting to come factor with us now, they have a bank account behind the scenes that like they can interact with and spend on and get paid real time. So, now you can go to Venmo or Robinhood even, and you can put your money in there, direct deposit there, and they give you a card, right? They give you a debit card that you can go spend that money on. No difference to us, right? So for us, instead of us paying you in 24 hours, or in some cases, real-time payments that we've enabled, we're one of the only factoring companies in the United States that do real-time payments, where we can pay you instantaneously. Now it is a little more expensive but we pass those costs on to our truck drivers. But soon we'll be able to pay these truck drivers real time, instantaneously, same day, and do it for free. And that's because we'll be moving, our money in a BasicBlock umbrella bank account into a truck driver who has a BasicBlock branded bank account underneath our own umbrella, right? It's no different than like if your parents or your sister or your brother has a Wells Fargo account and you have a Wells Fargo account. To move money into that Wells Fargo account, it's instant and it's free, versus like me using my Wells Fargo account to send it to my mom's Chase bank account. It can take time and typically it costs money.
Sure. And you said that you want to offer an interest rate for them to keep that money.
So not only are we trying to offer free factoring, but we're trying to offer interest rates. I do have to be a little careful on what we talk about in terms of like regulatory, but we're basically building them rewards. So, the way that I compare it to is, maybe a Southwest card where you're getting points on, if you fly a lot, a Southwest credit card makes a lot of sense.
Right away.
Or exactly, right? There's a ton of these companies that like individuals that keep their money in because they get rewards for it, right? Yeah. We're doing the same thing. So other things that we're working on is starting to work with manufacturers like Daimler, like PACCAR, all these big players, and saying, hey, if our trucking companies work with us, will you give them lower interest rates? About 45% of the market actually finances their truck with the manufacturer themselves, right? So, hey, can if our truck drivers come and you guys, we can ensure that the loan will be good, right? Can you give them a dynamic rate, right? Or on the other side of that, hey, maintenance company, we can guarantee that he's good for the money instead of having him pay it down right now. Can he, buy now, pay later type of thing? And we can help fulfill and service that payment processing on the maintenance side, right? They get the business sooner. The trucker gets to keep the money longer, right? There's all these different kind of like, benefits that you can start to build in when you start to, I don't want to say own the bank account, but when you start to, help build the bank account with those truck drivers.
Sure. No, it's brilliant, honestly. And it's shocking that like it hasn't existed beforehand, but when you look at the trucking industry, it's so backdated, right? And there's so many opportunities to go and fix that. So let's go back to the timeline. It's 2020 Q1. You started factoring, right? And then the pandemic hits. How did the pandemic affect BasicBlock?
Yeah, this might piss a lot of people off, but not at all. Like we didn't shut down the office. We stayed in. It was important and critical, I think, at that point in time for us. I think that point in time allowed us to figure out a lot what we have done now. And candidly, you just can't do that remote as well as you can do in person. So yeah, we had a small group of individuals that it was pretty much like, hey, we're quarantining together type of thing. Go here, go home, and like we'll figure it out. So for us, BasicBlock and like the pandemic were, I would say, incredible for our business.
Okay, and then could you tell us how the last 2 years looked like in terms of what you've achieved, the funding round, and what the future holds?
Yeah. So, the last, 2 years for us have been insanity. I think we've pretty much, gone from factoring pennies to, millions and millions and millions of dollars, every single month. And I think we've grown. I think somebody told me, I think it's, I don't know the exact number, but I want to say it's somewhere like 900% since we've, Q2 of 2020. So, we've pretty much almost 10x, our volume in terms of everything that we've done, really without having to 10x our employees. We really almost haven't added anyone. And that's part of the reason that we were able to raise such a large round. And while the majority of, and some of that is debt that we are, bringing on to help, solve our own cash flow issues, it's also, a ton of equity that's going into a lot of engineering resources right now. So data science, full stack engineering, and then operations, like in finance, we're a small team, and like I said, I dropped out of college. I have no background in finance. So, we're starting to build up a pretty strong leadership team in that sense.
Yeah. So it's fascinating. I really like your conversation, Taylor. I learned a lot about your, what you're building, and definitely rooting for you guys. I think you got a lot of, cool stuff. You're building a lot of cool technology, and I think it's very useful for the industry. You're probably really busy, and we're probably gonna start wrapping up, I'm guessing.
I do have a call in like 2 minutes. So
2 minutes. All right. Well, Taylor, thanks again for coming on the show. I hope to talk to you again sometime soon.
Yeah, I appreciate it, man. Thanks for having me on, and look forward to working with you guys at Warp as well.
Awesome. Sounds good, Taylor. Talk to you soon.
Cheers, man.
See ya. Thanks for tuning in to the Daily Freight Caviar podcast. If you enjoyed the podcast, or if you didn't, leave a review. Let me know what you think. I appreciate any feedback. If you'd like to have more Freight Caviar content, go to freightcaviar.com and subscribe to my email newsletter.